Breaking. In a move not seen in over 300 years, the UK Parliament has voted to exile Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, with their British passports flagged immediately. No warnings, no appeals. Just one final vote that shut the gates of Britain for a decade. Here's how it really happened. The vote that changed royal history forever. At exactly 11:43 a.m. inside the walls of Westminster, something happened that hadn't occurred in over 300 years. Inside the House of Commons, usually buzzing with arguments, shouts, and political theater, there was only silence. The Speaker of the House, a man known for his steady presence, stood at the dispatch box, his face pale, his hands just slightly trembling as he read out the numbers. 347 votes in favor, 216 against. With those words, the unimaginable became official. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle were formally exiled from Britain. There were no gasps, no applause, no roars of approval. Just a room full of lawmakers frozen in place, many staring blankly ahead, processing the weight of what they had just done. Some gripped their benches, others whispered to aides. But the room itself, one of the loudest in the nation, stood in near sacred silence. This wasn't just another political decision. This was an act of constitutional force, one not seen in the modern monarchy. What stunned both the public and global observers wasn't just the result, it was how fast it all happened. The motion to exile had been introduced only 6 days earlier, discussed behind closed doors for a tightly sealed 72-hour window. There was no public consultation, no televised hearings, no leaks to the press. It bypassed almost every expected norm of British parliamentary tradition. And yet, it passed. Cleanly, swiftly, like a blade. This wasn't just a political moment, said one MP who voted in favor. It was a constitutional earthquake, and we all felt the ground shift beneath us. By the time the result was announced, reporters stationed outside Parliament were already dialing newsrooms. Cameramen sprinted into place. Anchors interrupted live broadcasts. The BBC, Sky News, CNN, Fox, and Al Jazeera all broke into their regular programming within 90 seconds of the announcement. American commentators were stunned. Words like overreach, medieval, and dangerous precedent dominated the headlines. In contrast, British media called it inevitable, historic, and even long overdue. But no matter the spin, one fact stood tall. The British government had just exiled a prince and his wife. It was done with surgical precision. It was coordinated, controlled, and it left no margin for reversal. It wasn't a moment of emotion. It was a moment of calculation. This wasn't a snap reaction, a senior government official later admitted. This had been planned for months, every detail, every consequence, mapped out in silence. So, while the world reeled from the shock of the decision, those inside Parliament knew this was coming, and nothing was going to stop it. But perhaps the most telling part of this entire story wasn't inside Westminster. It was who wasn't there that day, who stayed away, and the silence they left behind. Which brings us to the next chapter, the choreographed royal silence. The choreographed royal silence. While Parliament exploded with tension, the royal family vanished from London. King Charles was seen in Scotland, calmly attending a private engagement. Prince William stayed in Windsor, his calendar suspiciously cleared. Princess Anne was hundreds of miles away in Edinburgh. All three of them gone, all on the same day. That wasn't a coincidence. It was strategy. By staying away, they avoided direct blame. They couldn't be accused of meddling. They gave Parliament space to act while quietly letting it be known. They wouldn't stand in the way. It was what some aides called a choreographed absence, a silent message louder than any speech. According to a senior MP, the monarchy gave a quiet nod of approval behind the scenes. This wasn't revenge, he said. It was about protecting the institution. The royal family didn't need to say anything. Their silence was the statement, and the message was clear. Harry and Meghan had crossed a line the royal family no longer had the energy or the will to tolerate. By the time the vote was announced, the palace had already moved into damage control mode. They had legal teams, security briefings, and succession planners ready to go. It was cold, it was calculated, and it was completely approved in the shadows. But as London burned with headlines across the ocean in California, another storm was just beginning. And it started with one notification on a phone screen at the breakfast table. California Awakening, the Sussexes' realization. Across the ocean, in Montecito, California, the morning felt ordinary until it wasn't. Over breakfast, Meghan was casually scrolling through her phone when the headline flashed. She froze. For a few seconds, she didn't speak. Then, in silence, she handed the phone to Harry. It was official. The UK Parliament had exiled them. No warning, no second chances. Just reality, cold and irreversible. What followed was a legal blow no royal had faced in modern history. Harry and Meghan were now banned from entering the UK for 10 years, with the threat of arrest if they tried to return. Their UK properties, including Frogmore Cottage, would be seized by the Crown Estate. Their remaining royal titles? Stripped. Their British passports? Flagged. Not technically revoked, but as useless as a cancelled credit card. But the part that hit hardest? Their children, Archie and Lilibet, would face travel restrictions too. No visits to the UK until adulthood, unless they petitioned Parliament. That meant no holidays with cousins, no visits to royal landmarks, no connection to the land their bloodline was tied to. Then came the official palace response, just 21 words. The matter is one for Parliament and the government. The royal family will continue to focus on its duties. No names, no warmth, just a final door quietly closing. And for the Sussexes, the realization was dawning. Everything they thought was untouchable, titles, property, access, legacy, was gone. Not slowly, not with negotiation, but all at once, in one December morning vote. But what they didn't yet understand is how long this had been coming. Because behind closed doors, the planning had already begun weeks before. The secret meetings that made it happen. It all started quietly in early November. A select group of MPs received private invitations to a meeting at the Cabinet Office. Officially, it was labeled a security briefing. In reality, it was the beginning of something much bigger. Inside that room were members of the Home Affairs Committee, intelligence officers, and constitutional experts. What they were shown was deeply disturbing. Over 8 months, investigators had gathered evidence suggesting Harry and Meghan's team were involved in media campaigns that deliberately targeted the royal family, especially Princess Catherine. Leaked emails, PR contracts, and communications with foreign media companies painted a troubling picture. None of it was strictly illegal. But to Parliament, it wasn't about law, it was about national stability. As one MP described the moment, "We weren't watching tabloid gossip. We were looking at something that could fracture the monarchy." That meeting ended in silence. The room, according to witnesses, felt like a funeral. A second, more serious meeting followed 3 weeks later, inside a secure room at Westminster. This time, both conservative and labor leaders attended. That's how serious it had become. Political enemies, now allies, facing one common threat. The decision was clear. Something had to be done, fast, before the story leaked, before pressure built, and before Harry and Meghan struck again from across the Atlantic. With support quietly building, Parliament began drafting the motion. But none of it could move forward unless they knew the palace wouldn't block it. That assurance came quietly, through a royal channel, and at the center of that silent approval stood Prince William. William's invisible hand. Behind the curtain of Parliament's boldest move in centuries stood a figure who said almost nothing publicly. Prince William. He never attended the meetings. He never signed a paper. But make no mistake, his hand was there. Quiet, powerful, and absolutely critical. Through his private secretary, William sent briefings to key MPs. The message was subtle, but unmistakable. The palace will not intervene. You have our understanding. That nod, soft as it was, unlocked everything. Without that green light, Parliament wouldn't have dared to vote. Exiling a royal isn't just rare. It's almost unthinkable. But with Prince William's silence, the message was clear. The family was done protecting Harry. And then came a line that changed the tone completely. During a private royal dinner in November, Princess Anne turned to a senior cabinet member and said, "Institutions survive by knowing when to amputate." She never explained it. She didn't need to. Everyone at the table knew she was talking about Harry and Meghan. It wasn't about personal betrayal anymore. It was about survival of the monarchy. In a way, it was heartbreaking. William, the same brother who had grieved beside Harry after their mother's death, was now standing back as Parliament cut ties. But from the inside, it wasn't a betrayal. It was a necessary sacrifice. And once William made it clear the palace wouldn't object, the final barrier was gone. Parliament could act, without fear, without resistance, without delay. But what legal power could even allow something like this? The answer was buried in the year 1703. The legal weapon from 1703. Few knew it even existed. A statute passed in 1703, buried in Britain's legal archives, written during a time of royal uprisings and national threats. Forgotten for centuries, until now. That law gave Parliament the power to banish individuals seen as a threat to the realm's constitutional stability. And while it had never been used against royals, it was still valid. In Britain's unwritten constitution, if a law exists and isn't repealed, it can still be enforced. So, when lawyers began searching for a legal path to exile Harry and Meghan, this 300-year-old statute suddenly became the sharpest weapon in the room. A team of constitutional historians and parliamentary lawyers drafted a modern version of the rule, fast, airtight, and ready for challenge. The resulting 47-page document spelled it all out. A 10-year entry ban for both Harry and Meghan. Property seizure, starting with Frogmore Cottage. Security privileges revoked, effective immediately. British passports flagged in international databases, alerting global borders. Intelligence cooperation with the US suspended. That last point stunned security insiders. It meant the UK intelligence community would no longer work with US officials on protecting Harry and Meghan. In one move, they went from royal status to private citizens with zero support from Britain. It was like watching the floor collapse under them, said one legal expert. This wasn't symbolic, it was total. The exile law from 1703 had done its job, swift, sharp, final. And now that the weapon had been used, the next question was, Could it have been prevented? Well, the truth is they were warned, repeatedly. The vote that shocked the world, why it happened so fast. The speed was brutal, the precision, surgical. By the time the public even knew a vote was being considered, it was already over. In the world of British politics, legislation moves slowly. Debates stretch for weeks, public consultation, party infighting, endless commentary from experts. It's all part of the process. But not this time. The exile motion against Harry and Meghan passed in just 6 days. Introduced behind closed doors, debated in secret, then rushed to a final vote without warning. Even some members of Parliament admitted they didn't see it coming. But that was the point. It was designed to strike before resistance could form. Leaks were the greatest threat. If the press caught wind of the plan, it would trigger a media firestorm. Public pressure would mount. Political allies would retreat. And Harry and Meghan would do what they've always done: get ahead of the story. So the plan was kept airtight. The list of MPs involved was limited. The legal team worked off an obscure statute from 1703, dusted off from the archives. It had been used once, over 3 centuries ago, to exile a nobleman suspected of threatening national stability. It had never been used against a royal, until now. One senior official put it bluntly: it wasn't cruelty, it was control. If we didn't act now, we'd lose the narrative forever. The final vote took place on December 3rd at exactly 11:43 a.m. The Speaker of the House read the result in a voice that reportedly trembled. 347 votes in favor, 216 against. Exile passed. In the chamber, there was no celebration, no applause, just stunned silence. A chill settled in the room as MPs absorbed what they had just done. Some stared straight ahead. Others looked down at their notes. Outside, reporters scrambled. In seconds, the news exploded worldwide. And in the palace? Stillness. There were no emergency meetings, no royal statements, no photo ops or briefings. It was as if the entire royal family had vanished. But that too was calculated, because they had vanished, strategically. Every senior royal had been moved out of London. King Charles was in Scotland, William at Windsor, Princess Anne in Edinburgh. Their absence meant one thing: plausible deniability. No one could accuse the family of influencing Parliament. But the truth was clear. The vote didn't happen without their blessing. The royal family didn't protest because they didn't want to. They needed this chapter closed. Quickly, quietly, permanently. The Royal Cold Front. 29 words of goodbye. At 2:30 p.m. on the same day the vote passed, Buckingham Palace issued a statement. It was short, so short it could fit in a single sentence. Just 29 words. The matter decided by Parliament today is a constitutional question outside the scope of royal commentary. The family's focus remains on duty and service to the nation. No names, no apology, no emotion. To the public, it sounded like indifference. But to those watching closely, it was worse. It was a full disownment. The monarchy didn't just let the vote happen. It washed its hands of it. And still, no one returned to London. Not Charles, not William, not Anne. All of them continued with their planned schedules, as if nothing historic had just occurred. Charles, in Balmoral, toured a community garden. William reviewed briefings at Windsor. Anne attended an equestrian event in Scotland. But inside the palace, staff described the atmosphere as strange, calm, almost too calm. Phones didn't ring, senior aides didn't scramble. Everyone already knew. Everyone had been prepared. One insider described it as relief disguised as routine, because now the palace no longer had to answer for Harry and Meghan. The chaos was no longer their problem. The exile had moved everything from personal pain to constitutional fact. Still, questions hung in the air. Did Charles feel guilt? Did William hesitate? Had Anne, ever the loyal enforcer, spoken up in private? There were no public answers, but behind the scenes, small moments leaked. That evening, Charles was spotted alone at a window in Balmoral, staring out at the hills as the light faded. Staff said he stood that way for nearly 20 minutes. No one approached. One aide whispered, "He looked like a man who'd made peace with heartbreak." At Windsor, William's reaction was colder. When told the final vote count, he reportedly nodded once and returned to his briefing. But later that night, in a private conversation overheard by a staff member, he was heard saying, "I didn't want it to come to this. But he left us no choice." And Anne? As always, her response was blunt. When asked by an assistant how she felt, she replied, "Institutions endure by making hard choices. Today was one of them." She said nothing more. No one in the royal family mentioned Harry by name. Not once. Not in public. Not in private correspondence. As far as the monarchy was concerned, he was no longer part of the equation. The 29-word statement said everything. It wasn't just exile. It was erasure. Inside the palace, cold silence, private relief. As the news of the vote broke across the world, Buckingham Palace didn't flinch. No press conference, no urgent family meeting, no statements of heartbreak. Behind the royal gates, everything moved as if nothing had happened. Because the truth was, they had all been prepared. King Charles remained in Scotland, keeping to his original schedule. That day, he visited a local Highland community project, shook hands, smiled politely, and returned to Balmoral Castle by sunset. He did not comment. He didn't even acknowledge the vote in public. Insiders later confirmed his silence was deliberate, not coldness, but calculation. He knew any emotion would be used against him. If Charles was grieving the loss of his youngest son, he did it behind locked doors. No staff dared to ask how he felt. Meanwhile, Prince William was at Windsor, reviewing paperwork when the final numbers were delivered to him, 347 to 216. A private secretary handed him the tally. William looked down, nodded once, and said, "Nothing." Then he returned to his documents. But moments later, during a conversation with Catherine, one staffer overheard him say quietly, "I didn't want it to come to this, but he left us no choice." That was the only flicker of emotion he allowed. Princess Anne was just as composed. While attending engagements in Edinburgh, a junior aide nervously asked for her opinion. Her response? "Institutions endure by making hard choices. Today, Parliament made one." And that was all. At 2:30 p.m., the palace issued its only official statement. The matter decided by Parliament today is a constitutional question outside the scope of royal commentary. The family's focus remains on service to the nation. 29 words. No mention of Harry, no sympathy, no apology. Just a clean legal separation between family and government. But behind that robotic calm, preparations were already underway. Charles's advisors began reviewing succession protocols to avoid any loopholes that Harry's exile might create. William's team coordinated with government communicators to prepare for media backlash. And throughout the palace, every royal department was briefed to stay silent, even as pressure from U.S. media outlets began pouring in. Inside the private apartments of Buckingham, no one was panicking. There was no scrambling, only a quiet, shared understanding. It's done. And though they'd never say it out loud, multiple sources described the feeling in the palace that night in one word: relief. But outside those stone walls, the aftershocks were just beginning. Because exile doesn't just punish the present, it shadows the future. The long shadow ahead. As the sun set over Montecito that evening, Harry and Meghan were no longer royals. They were exiled citizens, cut off from the country that had defined their identity and their brand. The consequences were immediate. Harry's passport, now flagged globally, meant that every international flight, every customs check, every border crossing would now raise questions. Countries with UK alliances like Canada, Australia, or even parts of Europe could treat him as a security complication. Behind closed doors, streaming giants were already reassessing their deals. Netflix and Spotify, which had invested millions in the Sussex story, now faced a branding problem. Without access, without palace ties, the Sussexes weren't whistleblowers anymore. They were just former royals with no way back. And the financial pressure grew. Much of their market value came from being royal insiders. But now, that door had slammed shut. "They lost their leverage," said one Hollywood producer. "You can't sell stories from a world that's kicked you out." But perhaps the most lasting effect: their children. Archie and Lilibet, both holding dual citizenship, would grow up as royal descendants banned from the UK. While technically free to return when they reach adulthood, the political tension around their family could haunt them for decades. Could they go to British schools, visit relatives, see royal landmarks? No one could say for sure. Meanwhile, quiet diplomatic conversations began unfolding behind the scenes. British diplomats reportedly asked the US government to keep a close eye on the Sussexes' future projects, especially anything critical of the monarchy. They weren't asking for censorship, but the message was clear. Continued attacks from Harry and Meghan could lead to diplomatic consequences. "Soft power has its limits," one British official said, "even in Hollywood." But what now? Could Harry and Meghan reinvent themselves? Could they build a life beyond the royal war they'd waged for years? Or would they become locked in a cycle of blame, lawsuits, and media battles they could never win? As for the monarchy, it had finally found peace. But at what cost? Publicly, they had chosen stability over compassion. But that choice came with cracks, especially among younger generations overseas. The US press, liberal circles, and even activists labeled the exile archaic, cruel, and a stain on modern royalty. Still, the palace's strategy was simple. Say nothing. Let the outrage fade. Keep moving forward. And so, with no ceremony, no final words, and no turning back, Harry and Meghan stepped fully into the unknown. The doors behind them? Closed. Locked. And not opening anytime soon. The vote is done. The passports are flagged. Harry and Meghan are out, officially and indefinitely. The monarchy chose silence. Parliament chose exile. And now, the Sussexes face a future without a homeland. What happens next? That chapter hasn't been written yet, but it begins with a door that's now locked forever.